Full house.
Yeah, man. How you doing?
I am good. I am very good. Through my psychiatrist and my psychologist and a new lifestyle I've trying to adopt, am like way less anxious, at least this week.
Ooh, that's good. That's a good change.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I don't think I'm like cured. I'm sure I'll get anxious like as soon as before we even end this podcast. But the last like couple of days, I've noticed like things that usually trigger panic attacks in me have not. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Oh, that's nice. I was like, every afternoon before we record, I'm always like, oh crap, we have this coming up. I don't know what we're going to talk about, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just feel it creep in slowly. And then once we sit down and record, I'm like, oh, that's fine. But like, just knowing that this is on my calendar ahead of time, like, sets in a little anxiety, which is kind of strange, but it's always good.
This is one of the things I don't get anxious about, but this is also episode number 60, so maybe we're getting the hang of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, we like have no trouble like we used to. Just kind of, we were always worried about like, do we have enough stuff to talk about on a podcast? Like, of course we do. We sit and talk about this stuff on all the time, every week, you know? So
we last week we brought on Andrew, who is back with us again.
Hey guys.
And then this week we are also joined by Nate Hopkins, who joined us a while back for an episode on Stimulus Reflex. So welcome, Nate.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for letting me crash the party.
Anytime. What have you guys been up to lately?
Been cutting tons of code on our primary project, Code Fund.
I too have been cutting lots of code. Finally got a big reskin out the door this week, so that's been pretty good, and just kind of addressing bugs related to that as they pop up.
Did you guys use a CSS framework for that? Like Tailwind or something? Or from scratch?
We used a Bootstrap theme. I would have liked to do it in Tailwind, but there's just so much you don't get out of the box with Tailwind that, and in the interest of moving quickly, Bootstrap was a good choice. So we bought like a pretty slick theme for it and just integrated that and changed up the UI and some of the user experience.
Nice. Yeah, that's like a common thing I think people hit with Tailwind is like, okay, you don't have modals, you don't have tabs, you don't have, buttons or anything. Like buttons are pretty easy to create, but like when you really compare it to Bootstrap, Tailwind is missing like all of the JavaScript and all like the component pieces, which can be a little frustrating if you're trying to move quickly because that takes some time to like, oh, you're making modals. Well, guess what? If you like make a modal, then people can still scroll the background, which is strange. So then you freeze the background, but then the scroll bar disappears and all your content shifts, 8 pixels only on OS 10 and it's 12 pixels on Windows or whatever. And you're like, wow, actually, this is the reason why Bootstrap is pretty handy instead of creating this stuff from scratch. Because there's like that rabbit hole of things you go down trying to build it yourself.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is that you have those Tailwind stimulus helpers, and I use them all the time.
Yeah, those have been pretty, I guess learning that stuff the hard way, like the scrolling stuff. But the Tailwind stimulus components have been pretty nice to have.
Yeah, I'd say it's not all rainbows and flowers with Bootstrap JavaScript in the as you pipe it through Webpacker. We've had to jump through a few hoops to get it all to work with, especially with the pre-bought skin.
We've been we are using Bootstrap at work, and I'm having trouble getting the way we have our UI set up to talk to React with like jQuery and Bootstrap. So that's an adventure I'm on. But I echo the sentiments of Bootstrap though. Like I love Tailwind, and if I'm like if I have a very, like somebody's giving me some designs, right, for me to implement, like Tailwind's awesome and I can crank it out. But when it's like, hey, design this yourself, I'm like, and then I end up like coding these horrible, horrible things. So I'm anxiously awaiting Tailwind UI.
I am as well. My trick so far is I just scroll through Steve Sugar's Twitter and copy some of the stuff that he's put out there.
Not a bad idea. Chris, you said you had some action cable stuff you want to talk about. You want to dive into that?
Yeah, I had like a really rudimentary like log streaming thing that I built for Hatchbox a long time ago. So like when your server's getting configured, like it'll stream stuff over Action Cable and show the logs on the UI, which is nice to know things are going on and whatever. And it's similar to kind of the same like thing that you have with Heroku logs if you want to see what's going on. But the Action Cable stuff is interesting in that like the thing I was telling you about earlier or complaining to you about earlier was like, on the back end, you like choose channels to stream from, and they have helpers for like a active record model. And there's none of that on the client side, which seems kind of strange because then you have to like, pass in like an ID or whatever in a type. So you know that like this is sending stuff over for this like log for this app ID and so on. But like on the back end, you don't have to worry about it too much because you're like streaming and broadcasting from that. And I thought that was kind of strange. And I was curious if you guys, because I know Andrew and Nate, you guys have done a lot of Action Cable stuff. I was curious if there was like a method you guys follow to handle the separation of those things, like on the client side, because it's kind of already built out on the back end, but it doesn't seem like it's fluid on the front end.
Yeah, I'd say there's some confusion, or can be some confusion because of the syntactic sugar that Rails provides you out of the box for broadcasting from like a model instance or something like that. But at the end of the day, the connection identifier and essentially the channel you're broadcasting to is really just identified by a string. So if you can boil it all down to just that, essentially, I went through this whole exercise when I did Stimulus Reflex and realized, it's just a string identifier that I need to sync the client to on the back end. But that can be somewhat obfuscated from you through all the syntactic sugar when you broadcast just to a model.
Yeah. Do you guys like, because one of the things, like I noticed GitHub does this with their streaming of things. Like when you click on an issue or a pull request, like it will send a message over and say like, basically subscribe me to this issue or pull request. And then when you navigate away with TurboLinks or whatever, or PJAX in their case, like it will unfollow that. Have you guys built anything like that where you are kind of like, because originally I was setting up this like follow unfollow thing, just with like regular JavaScript, but then I realized like probably if I just threw a stimulus controller on there that called the follow or unfollow, I could really easily grab the app ID or whatever and send that over, and then I could stream from that app on the server side and set that up a little bit easier so that it was like kind of similar on each side. I was curious if you had done anything in that route.
Yeah, I've done something very similar to what you just described, and I think it's a terrific strategy.
Have you run into any downsides, or how's your experience been doing that?
It's been pretty seamless. I haven't run into too many issues doing things like that with Stimulus. I mean, Stimulus is intelligent enough to rewire your client side components up when the DOM mutates. So you can do all sorts of crazy stuff to the DOM, and Stimulus will just do the right thing.
But then, when you receive a message, do you have to, like, how do you route from your, if you're on issues channel or something, you're like receiving updates from all the issues. Do you do routing in there, or how do you set that up?
Yeah, I guess if I wanted to, I don't know. I mean, a lot of ways to tackle that. I don't know that I would be too keen on implementing my own routing mechanics inside of the wire up and the stimulus controller, unless it was pretty simple.
Yeah, because what I'm kind of doing is, and probably it's similar to what you've got with some examples with Stimulus Reflex, but like, I have maybe a list of actions on the page and they can all receive updates, and I just have to like, choose which DOM element to go update based upon, the update that comes through over Action Cable. So I have to like, look at the ID and then go send the update to the correct element in the JavaScript. And it's one of those examples that kind of feels like, that's a good reason why probably Vuex and Redux and stuff kind of makes sense. Is like, we just have our data, then Action Cable can update it, and then the views re-render, and you don't have to worry about that like extra step in there.
We've actually been able to do some of that without any Redux, which has been nice. We just set like our state on like the parent component, and then Action Cable comes in and it's like, oh, I'm just going to update the state on this parent component, and it just like filters down to all the children, and it's like magic.
Oh, that's nice. What have you run into any, frustrations with that?
It's nice that with Action Cable, like you can send actions to a channel, so you have like multiple methods. It's tough that you only get like one received method. And so a way around that, like Andrew helped me with at work, was we like send hashes to the channel, like when we want to broadcast to the channel, and then we like case statement that JavaScript side. So that's been the really like only frustration I've encountered. But other than that, like it's really simplified our code, being able to like push some of the like complexity of re-rendering just into like React knows how to re-render it. So we just have to broadcast this new thing. It updates. I mean, it really, like, I joke, but it feels like magic, and it's definitely like a plus for using React.
Yeah, because that's kind of it seems like I would expect maybe the received callback on the JavaScript side to tell me also which, channel it was broadcast to, because if you stream from 5 different things in the same channel, then there's no way to kind of differentiate them. And then I was stuck with a pretty long case statement in my JavaScript because there was different things it was doing. And I was like, it seems kind of strange that I can broadcast to a specific thing on the back end, but the client side doesn't have any idea of which specific thing it was coming from.
Yeah. We have multiple channels we connect to, and we set state in the React component. For each channel, they get their own state. But so like any kind of methods we wire to it are kind of specific to, like the received method is specific to that channel in terms of React. But yeah, it is. I understand what you were saying too. And that
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a few of those like I separate out. For example, like servers and apps are separate channels because they obviously do different things. But then like, if I'm listening to 5 different apps on the front end for any like deploying state changes or whatever, then it's like I have to pass in the ID kind of redundantly into the hash that I broadcast, but it's also being broadcast to a specific channel when I say like stream from this app. So that seems kind of strange that it's like you can do a generic subscribe to a string and broadcast to a string, but they have helpers for broadcasting to a specific database record. So why isn't there an kind of a equivalent on the client side? And that may be just something that you need to go and add to Action Cable. So it might be a good place for me, me to go and see if I can contribute. I don't know.
That's all I hear is you volunteering to go do that.
Yeah, sounds like fun, huh? Which is related. You've been having some fun with just the different changes that Webpacker introduces to maintaining and building a gem that has assets. How have you been doing with that?
I have not been doing well. So we've resurrected Mad Men, which, for those who don't know, is an attempt at a new-ish Ruby on Rails administration system. And so we had some code for this. We worked on it at RailsConf, and basically, like, I meta-programmed the hell out of it, and we were like, "Oh, this is bad." So we wiped it away, and I started fresh with a Rails 6 engine, and like I was rocking. And then I went to go delete a resource, like using link to delete, method delete, data confirm, all that good stuff. But it just kept making GET requests. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? And then I was like, oh, I don't have Rails UJS loaded. Oh, Sprockets doesn't ship with JavaScript on by default anymore. Oh, Webpacker's not even in a Rails engine. And it's kind of sent me on a spiral because I learned that my understanding of Webpacker, Rails engines, and how they all work together is actually pretty small. So I am on a whirlwind.
I have actually played with Webpacker and engines before. And it's funny you mentioned this. The other day I saw a PR in Webpacker to update the docs for engines. And yeah, you're right. It doesn't ship with Webpacker. So you have to specifically add Webpacker as a dependency in the gem spec. And then there's a few other things. I got it to work though. I'll have to dig around and find that code.
All the love in the land. I'll even throw bonus points if you would pair with me on it, because like it's made me want to like give up on the project. And I think I don't know. I just don't understand it well enough is my problem. And there's a lot of people that do, but like there's some documentation on how to do it in the Webpacker like repository, but I feel like I'm always missing a step and I can't figure out what that step is. So I'm glad to know someone has experienced it, solved it. And if I heard right, I think you want to help me with it. So I'm excited about that.
I am definitely down to pair. I am not going to promise anything at all.
All I heard was, I have solved this and I'm going to help you solve it. So
it sounds like a good blog post too. I would like to read that. Well, after you guys spend 4 hours, banging your heads against the wall, of course.
I got Webpack dev server to run. Like, I was so close. I guess I am so close, but like now it's like it doesn't understand JavaScript pack tag. And I'm just like, now I don't know what to do. Like, this is why I love Webpacker so much in a Rails app, is because it like takes all these things away from me. And I can just use like modern JavaScript. I know that's like a really worn out phrase, but yeah, now that I actually have to like figure it out on my own, I'm like, dang it.
Yeah, I think that was, one of the long-term kind of things that was going to be just hard moving to Webpack. And even what's funny is like I upgraded some older app. I mean, it's not very old, but the Sprockets changes and SASE stuff that happened like behind the scenes recently, like as it turns out, your config manifest file in the asset pipeline, which I'd never really ever looked into, like it was always whatever the default was. Now it starts to compile all of the files, I believe, in the app assets like style sheets directory as separate things, very similar to the app JavaScript packs folder does, and it'll compile all those separate. But I didn't pay attention. I didn't notice that. And the other day it was like, yeah, all your assets don't compile anymore. Just wanted to let you know that. And I was like, what?
Shout out.
And it took me hours to go, like, find the commit or whatever that was like, oh yeah, this works totally differently now. Sorry. Because it was like, I would include files in the same folder, which would like depend on variables in the other file. And now that second file gets compiled separately, it doesn't have those variables anymore. And I was like, wow, like that was an important thing to know before I upgraded. And it wasn't like a major version change because it was like a dependency of a dependency or something. And it just like, everything's broken. All your assets. Sucks. See ya. That was not fun.
Yeah, I've also like wondered about, could I compile down the assets, like go ahead and build the bundle and just distribute that? Because
like pre-compile them all and
just bundle that, because that's the thing I could do. I even like experimented with using Laravel Mix to do that, which is like, I hesitate to say it's their version of Webpacker because it's a really like awesome, pretty API around using Webpack. But like I brought that in and could get it to like compile down, but then I was like, how do I get this to the host app? So
yeah,
I don't know.
And Rails itself for like Action Cable and Rails UJS and all those things, like now that has its own NPM package that you install. Now they gotta publish and release that separately, and that was kind of something you were hoping to avoid, right, with building a Rails engine, where it was like, if you install this gem, hopefully that's all you need. You don't have to also update package.json in your app and Yarn and all that.
Yeah, Andrew just linked us to the pull requests he mentioned about the documentation. And if this is the case, like, I don't deserve to be a developer because it's like a very easy step that I missed. So I'm not even going to talk about it anymore.
It's hidden in the docs folder, dude. No one would expect you to read that. Yeah, it looks like it might work similar to how it used to work, because that was, I guess, one of the nice things of, and I've done this before, like been using Rails 6.0 like beta or something, and then you also get the 6.0 beta Rails UJS or Action Cable node module, but then you might upgrade the gem of Rails 6 to the latest version, but you might forget the node version and that sort of thing. And now it's like a whole other set of dependencies you have to worry about keeping in sync. And if you don't have to do that and you can just have it automatically included in your engine, then that saves a lot of trouble, because then you might need to release something simultaneously. Like we have new backend code that relies on new front-end JavaScript, and if those aren't in sync, it's not going to work. So that probably solves that problem, which was just, I guess, introduced by Webpacker.
Yeah, I had the same type of decision to make around Cable Ready and Stimulus Reflex, and I opted to have a separate NPM package that publishes, although I still keep the code all together. So I have like a mono repo and release a gem and an NPM package and keep the versions in sync, which is a little bit problematic because both NPM and Ruby gems want to manage the version number. But my Yarn publish essentially will just, it complains that the version number, that the repo is already tagged with the version number, but it will still publish. So it works out.
Yeah. I wonder, it almost makes you feel like there should be some sort of like a bundle update or something that keeps them in sync. It's like, well, if you upgraded the gem for this, we should also upgrade the node module for it too, or something.
Yeah, I could write a little script to kind of help me. I've just got a little cheat sheet of instructions that I follow every time.
That's a good idea. What else is new? Anything interesting you guys have done on Stimulus Reflex or GitHub Actions?
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
No, go ahead. You started.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I've been meaning to move the Stimulus Reflex Expo site hosted over to Hatchbox and DigitalOcean. I just haven't had any time to do that. It was popular enough that I drained out all the free hours that Heroku provides. So right now,
That's funny.
I had to upgrade Heroku just to keep it running so people could access it and play around. Another update that I've got on the Stimulus Reflex front is I was actually invited to come speak at Paris Ruby conference in February. Their travel reimbursement, unfortunately, is a little more geared towards Europeans than they are for Americans. And so I'm trying to get the finances figured out so I can get over there. So hopefully that all works out and you'll be able to see me do a presentation on building reactive apps with Stimulus Reflex at an actual conference. So that will be kind of fun.
Will that be your first conference talk talking about it?
Yep, it would be.
That's exciting. It'll make history, just like everybody was talking about Phoenix Live View when it came out. So it's going to be you.
Yeah, we will see.
Andrew, you said you had some updates?
Yeah, Nate triggered a memory in me, though, that this morning I was scrolling through my phone and Stimulus Reflex has a Discord channel we set up. And someone messaged me this morning and said that they listened to Remote Ruby and he said, it just clicked that you are you. And I was like, yes, it's me. But I've been messing with Action still. I've actually got like an interesting issue kind of because I have a Rubocop linter action, which is by far the most popular action I have. And the scope of the API is increasing exponentially and becoming a problem. So I've decided to take like an interesting approach that I'm not sure how the community is going to feel about it yet, although people I've shown it to like it. Basically, there's all these options that you can pass to Rubocop, and slowly but surely people have been asking for more and more of those options that they want to configure in the action. And some of them have been like understandable, but some of them have been like, I came down definitely no on. Like the other day, I think this happened twice. People have been asking for the ability to only lint change to files when the action runs. And I was like, why do you want that? And they were like, well, because we have all these failing cops that are scattered throughout the repo that we're not going to fix. And we just want to compare like this branch and see if there's any failing lints on the changes. And I was like, no. I think I am actually going to support that, but I came down with this new format that I'm going to do, but I came down hard on that because I was like, look, like that doesn't really make sense to me because I've worked on a team that did the same thing, and it just doesn't really make sense to me outside of the fact that maybe you want to keep like that history. But then again, that doesn't really make sense to me either because you can just go back in the history farther. But the other issue, I was like, there's a Rubocop command, it's called like auto gen config or whatever, which will run through your project and it will create a file of all your failing lints. And basically it'll create a file to ignore all of them. And you can just include that in your Rubocop YAML file. So I was like, if anything, you should be taking advantage of that. If you're not going to fix the lint, then at least like ignore it in the to-do file so that, so that's not a problem. I was like, I don't really want to change the API scope just for that. But one thing I've been doing is as like, because you can pass input like variables basically to GitHub Actions, and that started to get larger and larger. And then I ran into some issues where if you want to gem install with versions. So like if I want to have RuboCop version, I don't know, 0.75, and then I also have another RuboCop plugin like RuboCop Performance, and I want that to be at a certain version too, you have to gem install a little bit differently. You can't just do -v for each of them. You have to do, like, if you're doing it all in one big gem install, you have to do like gem install : version for each of them. So that was creating some issues. So what I basically did is I created the ability to add a config file in your repo, because there's some limits with the way you can pass variables to the actions, and I couldn't do what I wanted to do, which is why like the way I implemented the version thing specifically became a bit of a problem. So now I have a YAML file that you put in your .github folder, and it has all of the inputs. And because I can define the way that YAML file is structured, and I can parse it like on my own without GitHub doing it automatically, I can do a lot nicer things and hopefully fix up that version issue I'm having.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. I mean, it's consistent too with what a lot of, if you want to use GitHub Actions or Circle CI, you've got to add a hidden YAML file. So having a configuration in a YAML file, you want to probably track changes to that over time anyways. So it makes sense to put it in there. Does it feel good that you're like now having to maintain something that people are using, or is it also the frustration alongside of it is like, right, now I have to constantly like answer questions, or now I've got to start telling people, no, we can't add your one-off feature or whatever?
I think if I used to listen to the Bike Shed, like, I mean, I still do, but I basically went through and listened to all of them once. I think I've done it twice actually. And some of the earlier episodes with Sean Griffin and Derek Pryor, there was one episode in particular where they kind of talk about the issue of like people coming in and having like this one-off problem. They want you to stick their fix in for it. They open a PR and they put their fix in for it. And then they kind of talked about, the dangers of doing that, and just considering like now you're maintaining that code, and if it breaks, you got to fix it. And there's all these other issues. So I've been very careful to try to adhere to that advice they gave. And I'll have to try and find the episode. I have no idea where it's at, but I think that's helped a lot. So that part has not been that bad. I have had to answer a lot of questions. A lot of people who they're like, oh, the example doesn't work out of the box. And I'm like, yes, it does. And they're like, no, it doesn't. You have to add this RuboCop plugin to make it work. And I'm like, no, you are including that RuboCop plugin in your RuboCop config file, so it doesn't need it to work out of the box. Things like that. I haven't gotten too frustrated with it yet, but I'm hoping that once I nail down this config file, a lot of those issues will kind of be a little bit easy. Well, not the answers, not the questions, I guess, but a lot of like the additions, like if they want to like append something to the RuboCop API or the RuboCop command we create, then this will make it a lot easier to do that. But I'm not sure how many more changes I'm going to add after this kind of gets cleaned up.
Yeah, which makes sense. Like at some point you're going to have kind of the base of what you want to do. And if people want to go and fork it and extend it or whatever, then they can do that. And if they choose to, say, here's some new stuff, maybe that you wouldn't mind maintaining, they can make a PR and whatever. But yeah, it's one of those interesting things as something grows and gets usage. Like I'm still maintaining a gem called Simple Calendar that was literally just a test. Like as a beginner Rails developer, I was like, I've never made a gem before, and I'm going to try making a calendar one. Because I think at the time there was only like the table 4 gem or something like that, and it would generate kind of a calendar out of, I don't think it was necessarily tables, but it was divs and stuff that formatted like a table, and I was like, maybe I'll build something similar to that. And then people started to use it and file like issues that it didn't work. And I was like, yeah, because I never intended it to really work or other people to use it. And I still maintain that today, but luckily it's like these are the like features I'm going to offer. If you want to like add more stuff, you can fork it, and like that's my boundary. Like we're done on development here because I've never really used that too much in my own projects. It was just like an experiment. So it's much easier probably when you're like actively using your own library that you maintain than one you don't.
Well, funny enough, the Rubocop action is definitely my most used out of all of the ones I've had. Not when I say all, I mean like 3 or 4, but I don't actually use any of them. Funny enough.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, this is, like one of the easiest ways to learn. And it's really good experience to like go build that and then have to maintain it for other people, because you end up being forced into like, okay, where do I set my boundaries? And like you have to make a bunch of decisions that you couldn't really simulate if you were trying to like teach yourself how to maintain a project. You can't present yourself with like weird requirements that crop up. Like it only happens when people are asking you real stuff. So I bet it's been a good experience to go through all that.
Yeah, it has. And luckily, what I did in the beginning is I created the Rubocop one and then used that to basically create others, because once I had that one good and working, then it was super easy to adapt it to other linters like Haml lint and standard RB. So I created those as well. But the Rubocop one was the one that started getting all the feature requests, and they slowly but surely drifted apart. And I'm hoping once I nail down this config file that I can bring them all back under using like a config file for each of them, and that will be a lot cleaner. And then I would like to make more. So yeah, it's pretty nice. It's been nice that I had that base and was able to just kind of edit a few things here and there to get it to work for other gems. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I've still, and I messaged you about this earlier this week, but I was using GitHub Actions to run tests, and I don't know, sometime in the last week, they've started to fail with like the I notify watchers limit being too low. And it like happens when I run Rails test. And normally you would see that from like guard watching too many files in your repo and stuff. But I mean, I didn't even have guard in my repository, so I'm not really sure what's going on there, or if they changed the notify limit in the default image or whatever it runs under. I'm not sure. So I need to figure that out. But if anybody's run into that and fixed it, let me know. I haven't been. I know GitHub Actions are changing probably pretty frequently, and I'm sure you've seen that in your development. So I've been kind of like, oh, I'll just continue relying on Circle CI, and if GitHub Actions is running successfully, then great. But I'm not going to make it my only CI for a little while.
Yeah, once I started using my own Docker image, things got a lot easier. But Circle, I'm working on a blog post. I'm pretty sure I said I was working on this last week too. So spoiler alert, it's not done yet. But I compared GitHub Actions at the end of it with Circle CI, and Circle is just so much faster. Like even if you want to have all your stuff in GitHub Actions, Circle CI is like 200% faster, I'm pretty sure, for most cases.
Wow, that's pretty significant. Do you think it's just the hardware they're running, or is there other factors maybe?
I am not sure. I imagine that I think they have their caching down a little bit better. I know the fact that I'm using my own Docker image is having somewhat of an impact, but on Circle CI, you use a Docker image as well. So unless I'm just not caching that as efficiently, well, actually, I take that back. because the time that gets lost is not usually in the Docker image spin up. It's like if you're on a cold cache, then bundling on Circle versus GitHub Actions takes a drastically different amount of time. And then just running like the commands in general, they're just slower on GitHub.
Yeah, maybe they're allocating more CPU or something to them instead. I don't know. That's interesting because that certainly would be a good place to measure that. Yeah, if it takes that much longer to compile, no Kogiri and whatever, that will give you a good idea of like, we have a much slower CPU on one than the other. But yeah, that I need to switch to the Docker image too, just because. And there was a comment recently too on this, but like set up Ruby action on GitHub only goes up to like Ruby 2.6.3, which is strange. And then they haven't made 2.6.5 available yet. And there was a comment that was like one of the GitHub people working on it that was like, well, we don't really want to compile all these for you. So it was like, okay, well, then why does setup Ruby exist at all? Like, why wouldn't we just use the, Ruby 2.6.5 Docker image? And why wouldn't you recommend that as our default? So maybe that's going to change. Maybe they took one approach and it didn't quite work out. And they're like, we should shift gears and, encourage people to use Docker images that already have Ruby set up and everything. So I don't know.
Yeah, but there's problems there too. Yeah, I can shoot you a link to the Docker image I have. I definitely know I can speed it up a little bit more than it is right now, because right now it's just using a base Docker image. It's not using Alpine or anything. So there's definitely some speed improvements that could be had, but it works pretty quickly. And like to the point where I haven't really needed to like go like speed it up more. I mean, I think it takes like, I don't know, 15 to 30 seconds to spin it up on GitHub Actions.
That's good. Yeah, that's pretty quick. So yeah, I'll have to try that, and I'm curious to see how it'll go because yeah, I like fiddled with it for a little bit, did a screencast on it, and was like, oh cool, I'll like set this up for a few apps, and it'll be nice to have everything in the same tool with my source code and all that. And then it was like, I'm starting to go down that rabbit hole of fiddling with this more and more often just to keep it running. And, that started to be like, all right, I think it's time to just put this down, go back to work and do, useful things instead of fiddling with this. But that kind of feels like the case with setting up any CI for the first time.
Yeah, the other problem with running on a default Docker image is you don't get like the default Ruby Docker image doesn't have Node, it doesn't have Yarn, and it doesn't have any of the stuff you need for system tests. So and then you have the stuff for Postgres that you need to add. So yeah, doing it in my own Docker image was nice because I guess maybe the difference is negligible. I don't even know if that's the right word, but because I don't have to set up Node. I don't have to set up Ruby, then Node, and then apt-get stuff for Postgres, and then maybe do some other things later in the file. Like that one Docker image has everything it needs right out of the box: Node, Yarn, the stuff for running system tests like Google Chrome and Chrome driver, and the extra packages for Postgres. And I even like stuck some environment variables, like some base environment variables in there. So it's been so much nicer once I figured out how to get that to work.
Yeah, it's a good point because I know for Circle CI, I'm using like Ruby and Node and some browser setup all in one image already. So I didn't even think about that, but that's definitely a difference between the two because the way that I know I'm installing like libpq and whatever for Postgres, which it's definitely not getting cached, and that's a redundant thing to do every single time. So yeah, that's a great point. I'll have to switch that over. Anything else you guys want to talk about before we end this episode?
I am fresh out of hot things to talk about. Except I did order something from Hot Topic, which is a hot topic in itself. I ordered. Did we talk about this?
I think we did. Maybe it was. I can't remember if we talked about this on the last episode or we just talked about this in general.
The Office version of Clue.
Yeah, I think so. I know we talked about it at some point.
It arrived. It is here.
Awesome.
My life is complete.
Yeah, you're gonna set up a big party to have a big Clue playing.
Yeah, I'm gonna invite one other family over. It's gonna be a really big night.
There's a place literally a block from my house that just opened called Recess, and it's a bar that has like the concept is like all the games you played in school at recess, you can go play them as an adult with beer, which I thought was a pretty fantastic idea.
That rules.
So that's my weekend.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, no, I'm out of stuff.
I'm gonna do Drunk Foursquare.
Mm-hmm.
How about you guys? Anything else?
I did realize this after the last episode. Nate, our traffic for CodeFund is like over 1 million hits per day, right?
Yeah, we're doing about 1.4 in ad impressions daily, and that's not the only traffic. So that's just our ad renders.
Yeah, so I couldn't remember how many per month, but yeah, so it is higher than I think I thought I said.
That is awesome. What are you running on Heroku?
Yep, we are on Heroku, and we're tuned well enough to not have too terrible of a bill. I mean, I'm sure we could bring that hosting cost down, but it's just a matter of how much developer time or ops time we want to put against it. It's going to be hard to justify with a small team right now.
Right. It's one of those willing to pay the bill because you've got a little bit more money than time at the moment. And then that bill creeps up and it'll shift at some point. But yeah, that's awesome. Are you guys using the like large performance dynos and stuff, or what's your setup like?
No, we're still on the standard dyno. So like the second tier of the standard dynos. And our database is still, I think we're just on a standard 2 plan for that one right now.
That's fantastic. So presumably good caching and stuff.
Good caching, some creative use of Postgres features like table partitioning and things like that.
Ooh, that's good. We'll have to talk about that in the next episode. I want to dive in more into that kind of stuff, especially because Rails 6 is going to have better. Well, Rails 6.1 is going to have more multi-database support and all that stuff. So I'm sure people would like to learn more about that.
Yeah, definitely. We tried to roll out multi-DB on one particular API endpoint, and we need to go audit the code. I'm not sure if it's the code or if we just configured something wrong, but we essentially took our system offline trying to run that experiment.
Oh no, that's bad. That's funny. Anything else you guys have before we wrap up?
I'd just throw in there, go take a look at Cable Ready, the Cable Ready gem. This is looping back to the beginning of our conversation when you were talking about just emitting logs out to a web browser. Essentially, what Cable Ready does, it's the piece that sits underneath Stimulus Reflex, but it allows you to have a background job emit DOM mutations or events. You can essentially modify client DOM to anybody that's connected on the channel, the WebSocket channel. So it's pretty cool. You can emit DOM events. You can append HTML into the DOM. You can remove items. You can just change the contents of it. You can do all sorts of DOM operations from a background job.
Oh, that's super nice. That would definitely come in handy. Most of my stuff's just simply like replace or find or append an element or something right now, but as it grows, it will definitely be able to take some good use of that stuff because That is certainly like where I foresee it going, getting more complex and then just being like kind of a mess pretty easily. So I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, with the new skin we just launched, we are now running Cable Ready and Stimulus Reflex in production.
Ooh, that's exciting. I'll have to have you show us like where you're using it at. I'd like to see that.
Yeah, for sure. It's in areas that I've had to re-implement in other apps, but using React like inside of Rails. And the amount of time I spent like hooking up Stimulus Reflex and getting the thing I wanted to work versus the time it took in the past for me to, oh, well, now I got to add React and now I got to figure out how that works. Now I got to wire it all up to the front end and the back end. And now I have to have serializers and yada, yada, yada. It was so much nicer like to spend like 30 minutes like doing that work here with Stimulus Reflex than spending like days doing it with React.
I'm sure Jason can relate to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm actually reading through all that stuff right now that you're talking about it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's probably it for this episode. As usual, you should give us a rating on iTunes if you enjoyed this episode. And I guess you guys want to share where they can find you online?
Sure. I'll go. It's I'm Hopsoft everywhere. Hopsoft on Twitter, Hopsoft on GitHub.
And I am Andrew M. Codes everywhere.
Sweet. Well, thank you all for joining us. And Chris, we'll do it again next week.
Yes, sir. See ya.